Hey guys! Tonight, we begin with something that sounds like a nightmare, but it was real. A justice system where children were locked in smoky huts filled with burning chili peppers. Where a third theft meant losing not your freedom, but your skin. And where a single sip of the wrong drink could get you killed before sunrise. This is the Aztec Empire. Not just pyramids and calendars, but punishment so strange, so creative, and so terrifying that they make modern prison look like a warning letter. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Little Historical. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Here's a question to keep in your mind while you watch. What would you fear more, a beating, or being paraded bald through the marketplace while your neighbors throw trash at you? Because for the Aztecs, shame was often worse than pain. Now, dim the lights. Let your screen be the only glow. And let's walk together into the darkest, most bizarre corners of Aztec lore. Imagine a child who talks back to his mother. In most cultures, that means a lecture, maybe a lost privilege, or being sent to his room. But in the heart of the Aztec Empire, discipline was not gentle. It was sensory. It was unforgettable. And sometimes, it came in the form of smoke. Thick, stinging, eye-watering smoke made from nothing more than dried chilies tossed onto hot coals. The Aztecs called it chill chili. And if you were a disobedient boy or girl, you would come to know that word very deeply. Not through explanation. Through experience. You see, Aztec parents believed that obedience was not optional. It was the foundation of a functioning society, a gift to the gods who demanded order. So when a child refused to sweep the temple floor, or spoke rudely to an elder, or simply acted lazy, the correction was swift. They would take the child to a small, enclosed hut or a dark storage room. Then they would light a fire of green wood and throw handfuls of chili peppers onto the flames. The smoke would rise, thick and invisible, and fill every corner of that tiny space. The door would close. And the child would be left inside. Not for hours. Just minutes. But minutes that felt like lifetimes. The smoke didn't bruise. It didn't break bones. But it invaded the lungs, the nose, the eyes. It made breathing a desperate act. It turned every blink into a burn. The child would cough, choke, and cry not from pain alone, but from a strange, intimate terror. Because there was no enemy to fight. No hand to dodge. Just air that had turned against you. And in that silent, suffocating darkness, something changed. The rebellion softened. The will bent. And when the door finally opened, and fresh air rushed in, the lesson was already carved into memory. What makes this punishment so haunting is not the cruelty. It is the intimacy of it. The parents weren't torturing for sport. They were conditioning. They were teaching you that the world has consequences that cannot be seen, only felt. That your body remembers what your mind might try to forget. And in a society with no prisons, no long-term jails, fear had to live inside you. The chilly smoke chamber was that fear, made breathable. So the next time you picture an Aztec childhood, don't just think of games or rituals. Think of a small, trembling silhouette behind a closed door, tears streaming down chili-reddened cheeks, learning the first and most important lesson of the empire. Obey, or the air itself will punish you. And as that child stumbles out into the daylight, gasping and humbled, the parents simply nod. Because tomorrow, there is another lesson waiting. One that might involve cactus spines. But that is a story for the next chapter. And what a dark chapter it is. Because if chili smoke was for children, the real horror of Aztec justice was reserved for those who took what did not belong to them. Stealing. In the Aztec Empire, theft was not merely a crime against your neighbor. It was an offense against the gods who blessed the marketplace, the harvest, and the balance of every household. And the punishment did not come all at once. No, the Aztecs believed in a slow, creeping doom. A three-act tragedy where the final curtain fell not with a bang, but with the wet, deliberate peel of skin. Let us walk through those 3 acts together. The first time you stole something small, a basket of corn, a clay pot, perhaps a few lengths of cloth, you were not killed. You were shamed. Publicly. Your head would be shaved bald, your body painted with black soot, and you would be paraded through the marketplace while neighbors hurled insults and perhaps a few stones. It was humiliating, yes. But you survived. You learned. Or so the empire hoped. The second time you stole, the Aztecs decided you were not paying attention. So they took your freedom. You became a slave to the very person you robbed. Not forever, but long enough to understand that labor is a privilege. You would work in silence, your dignity stripped away, your days measured in borrowed breath. Some thieves never saw the light of freedom again. But for those who did, there was always the shadow of a third mistake. And the third time. The Aztecs did not believe in wasting resources on the hopeless. They believed in symbols. In messages carved into flesh. The third offense meant ritual flaying. You would be taken to the plaza, the same place where you once sold your stolen goods, and there, under the eyes of everyone who knew your name, your skin would be removed. Slowly. Methodically. Not to kill you quickly, but to unmake you as a person. The skin, the Aztecs believed, was a sacred layer, the boundary between your soul and the world. To remove it was to erase your identity. And sometimes, a priest would wear that skin in honor of the earth goddess, a grotesque costume of rebirth and punishment wrapped into one. You are still breathing at the end of it. For a while. But you are no longer human in the eyes of the community. You are a lesson. A wet, red lesson hanging in the sun so that every other thief thinks twice before reaching for what is not theirs. And as the crowd disperses, as the market returns to its usual noise, one thought lingers in every mind. Better to starve than to steal a third time. But the Aztecs had other rules, other boundaries that could not be crossed. Rules about love, about marriage, about the body that belongs to another. And those punishments were no less creative. They were wetter. And they involved canoes. And they involved canoes. Dark, wooden vessels gliding silently across the still waters of Lake Texcoco. You might think a canoe is for fishing, for trade, for crossing from one shore to another. But in the Aztec Empire, a canoe could also be a coffin. A slow, floating coffin for those who dared to break the most sacred bond of all. Marriage. Because if the Aztecs hated a thief, they despised an adulterer even more. Marriage was not a private arrangement between two hearts. It was a cosmic contract, witnessed by the gods themselves, bound by the honor of families and the stability of empires. To break that bond, to share a bed with someone else's spouse, was to invite the kind of punishment that did not end with a shaved head or even a flayed back. It ended with water. Let us be clear. The Aztecs did not believe in divorce court. They believed in blunt objects and deep lakes. If a man was caught sleeping with another man's wife, the wronged husband had a choice. He could kill the lover right there, on the spot, with his own hands, and no judge would question him. That was justice. But if the husband hesitated, if he brought the matter to the courts instead, the state would take over. And the state was not merciful. The punishment for adultery was public execution. Often by stoning. Heavy rocks dropped onto the head until the skull gave way. Sometimes by strangulation. A rope pulled tight by steady, unfeeling hands. But there is a darker, stranger version of this punishment. One that haunts the old accounts. Some sources say that adulterers, both the man and the woman, were tied to a canoe and paddled out to the middle of the sacred lake. Not to be drowned immediately. No, that would be too quick. They were thrown into the reeds, their hands bound, their feet weighted, and left to sink slowly into the muddy darkness. The water was sacred to Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. And so the death had to match the crime. A wet crime required a wet ending. The lake would swallow them inch by inch, their last breath bubbling up through the cattails as the canoe drifted away. You might wonder why such cruelty for a private act. But in Aztec eyes, nothing was private. The body belonged to the community. The marriage bed was an altar. And to desecrate it was to invite chaos into the world. So the lake took them. And the canoe became a hearse. As the ripples faded and the water grew still again, the message was clear: keep your hands where they belong. Because the next canoe you see might not be taking you home. It might be taking you under. But the Aztecs saved a special kind of horror for the young, for those who drank before they had earned the right. And that punishment did not involve water. It involved the end of a very short life. It involved the end of a very short life. And that brings us to the youngest victims of Aztec justice. The teenagers. In an empire where discipline started in childhood with chili smoke and cactus spines, you might think that reaching your teenage years would bring some relief. A little freedom. A little respect. But the Aztecs watched their youth like hawks, and nowhere was their vigilance more terrifying than around a drink called pulque. A frothy, mildly sour beverage made from the fermented sap of the maguey plant. To the adults, to the elders who had survived battle and earned their wrinkles, pulque was sacred. It was used in religious ceremonies, in funeral rites, in celebrations of the gods. But to a teenager, pulque was poison. Not because of what it did to the body, but because of what it represented. Disobedience. Arrogance. A refusal to wait your turn. Let that sink in. In the Aztec Empire, a single sip of fermented sap could end your life. Not a gulp, not a drunken binge. One sip. If you were caught drinking before you had proven yourself in battle, before you had married, before you had earned the right through age and wisdom, the punishment was not a lecture. It was not a fine. It was death. For a first offense, you might be shaved bald, your head gleaming like a humiliated moon, and paraded naked through the streets while your own neighbors threw trash at your feet. That was the merciful warning. But if you were foolish enough to drink a second time, or if you were a noble's son who should have known better, the sentence escalated fast. Execution by strangulation. Or by beating with a stone club. Often in public. Often in the same plaza where you once played as a child. Imagine being 15 years old, your body barely hardened, your voice still cracking, and standing before a priest judge who has already decided your fate. No lawyers. No appeals. Just a rope or a rock. Why so severe? Because the Aztecs believed that drunkenness was not a mistake. It was a spiritual rot. A doorway to laziness, violence, and disrespect. And a teenager who drank was a teenager who had already chosen chaos over order. The empire could not afford that. One public execution of a young drunkard was enough to sober an entire generation. Parents would whisper the story to their children. Point to the spot where the boy fell. And the lesson would sink in deeper than any pulque ever could. So the next time you think about sneaking a drink before you are of age, remember the Aztec teenager who never saw his 20th birthday. His crime. Thirst. His punishment. Eternity. And as his body was carried away, the elders would turn to the crowd and say nothing. They didn't need to. The silence was the final lesson.